The famine in Ireland. A famine hero, William Kelly from Portrane, who could have been the saviour. He was the saviour in his area, but it could have been so much bigger what he could have achieved. I well remember tinning and snigging turnips and mangle in the 1960s. The seeds were sown in rows on drills when the plants were about 3 to 4 inches tall. And we had a turnip shaver, a simple little piece of farm machinery, horse-drawn and later tractor-drawn, that pushed the clay away from the base of the plant. We then thinned the turnips or mangle rows, leaving a gap about 4 to 5 inches between each plant, allowing them space to grow. When the crop was ready to be harvested, we pulled the turnips or mangle up and snigged, some say snagged, the turnips or the mangle, meaning we cut the tops off the roots and the roots off each tuber, and we cleaned away the clay. The turnips were used for human consumption, and the cattle got them just as cattle feed, while the mangles were only used for cattle feed. Amazingly, I recently discovered that in 1848, in the first year of the famine in County Dublin, a highly respected farm steward from a 2,000-acre estate in Portrane, County Dublin, invented a new food called Mangle wurzel bread, which saved countless lives during that terrible period in our Irish history. Sophie Evans from Portrane has gone down in history not just as an outstanding female Irish landlord or landlady following the death of her husband George Evans in 1842, which was in itself a very unusual position for a woman in the male-dominated world of the 1800s. Sophia was widely recognised as a great benefactor of the poorer classes in Ireland's highly class-ridden and stratified society. She was the only daughter of Sir John Parnell from Avondale, a lady of the highest standing in society, who would list Daniel O'Connell, Charles Stuart Parnell, and queens and kings of England, and even Napoleon and Josephine Bonaparte among her friends and acquaintances. Her story deserves a much broader canvas than I can fit into this story of William Kelly's Mangle wurzel bread. For the moment, let's stick with the story of William Kelly of Portrane, Sophie Evans' tried and trusted farm steward and forgotten hero of the famine period in Ireland. At the outset of the famine, when it was first recorded in Fingal in 1845 that the potato crop had been wiped out by blight, William Kelly, farm steward and well-educated agronomist, immediately recognised the serious food crisis facing the impoverished Irish population. The most cost-effective means of providing food relief, it was quickly found, was to import cheap food, poor quality maize or Indian meal from Britain's India colonies. Daily survival rations were set at £1 a meal per day for adults and £0.5 a meal per day for children. The meal was generally ground and added to warm water. But Kelly, having had his attention drawn to a recent newspaper article by Sophie Evans concerning the experiments of a Viennese baker with wheat and beetroot, he suspected that the available meal could be much more effectively used. So Kelly began to experiment, mixing quantities of Indian meal with cheaper crops like turnips, parsnips and mangle. He wrote as follows: I tried several experiments in making bread from the different field root crops, in combination with wheaten and oaten meal, the results of which I communicated at the time to the Royal Dublin Society. In my experiments, I found that 10 pounds of turnips yielded matter capable of being made into bread, with an equal weight of wheat meal. The mangle wurzel is prepared for bread by grating the root, then pressing the pulp so as to render it sufficiently dry to combine with an equal weight of meal into bread. The turnip is then boiled and pressed. The carrots and parsnips are first slightly boiled, then peeled. then they're boiled again, then they're mashed fine and pressed the same way as the turnip. It is a question whether there is any economy in converting any of these roots into bread, except Mangle wurzel, which cannot be used as human food in any other way. The crop Kelly finally settled on was Mangle, a type of beet grown primarily for livestock. Drawn to the possible use of the plant for human consumption, Kelly had acted with an irrepressible urge of a visionary. Kelly's bread proved popular, and within weeks it was in extensive use locally. On the 12th of December 1846, he offered samples to the Practical Agricultural Association, and 7 days later, on the 19th of December, to the Royal Dublin Society. Here, with Robert Kane in the chair, the secretary would read what he described as a very important paper from Mr. William Kelly to a sectional meeting of the organisation. He said, "Gentlemen, about a fortnight since there appeared in most of the Dublin newspapers an account of a discovery said to have been made by a baker at Vienna, making bread from a mixture of wheaten flour and garden beetroot, in which it is said he was eminently successful. Now, I must say that the merit of a discovery should scarcely be given in this case to the baker of Vienna, because bread has been made in England and even in Ireland many years ago of wheaten meal and turnips in equal parts, as well as of meals and potatoes. And taking beet instead of turnips or potatoes can scarcely be called a discovery. My attention having been directed to this subject a few days ago by Mrs. Evans, it occurred to me that if the Vienna baker succeeded in making good bread of wheaten meal and garden beet, that we must, even in Ireland, succeed in making good bread of wheaten meal and Mangle. And I accordingly tried the experiment, in which I flatter myself in saying I have been eminently successful. I take the liberty, gentlemen, of sending you a specimen of the bread. It is made and baked on the griddle exactly in the same way as the people in this part of the country make their wholemeal bread, so that every cottager is certain to have made in his own family just as good an article of food from the same material. I have, with all my family, used the same bread as the specimen I sent you at dinner exclusively for the last 4 days, and I esteem it highly, and if my estimate of it be just, I think it is a subject of the greatest importance at the present time. The cake which I take the liberty of sending you, gentlemen, is composed of exactly 2.5 pounds of wheaten meal, 2.5 pounds of Mangle, with a little barm and salt. It weighs exactly 4¾ pounds. The Mangle wurzel is cleaned and grated on a dish, and then let dry on a colander or a hair sieve. A large portion of the juice thus drains off, which takes a great part of the nutritious matter of the root with it, I suppose. I was anxious, however, to have the bread made exactly with equal proportions of the Mangle root and the meal. It is a fact, for which I am well acquainted, that cattle will thrive better on food composed of a mixture of beans and roots, or oats and roots, like turnips or Mangle, than on either of these grains or roots separately. Hence, it is possible that this bread is more nutritious than bread made exclusively of wheaten meal. If it is found to be good bread, then viewing it as an article of economy, it will stand thus. 100 weight of wheaten meal will cost at present 18 shillings. 100 weight of Mangle will cost 1 shilling. It is true that a stone of wheaten meal makes 18 pounds of bread. When manufactured exactly as this cake I sent to you, but the reason is obvious. It takes more than 4 pounds of water to make 14 pounds of meal with bread, but there is very little nutrition in water, so that I think there is much real gain by the increased weight. There is a large quantity of Mangle wurzel in this country that could be available for human food in this way this season. And if by directing attention to this subject that I can in the remotest degree be the means of saving one human being from hunger, I shall be happy indeed. I am, gentlemen, your obedient servant, William Kelly, steward to Mrs. Evans. So that was Kelly's letter, and it was reprinted the following week in the Farmers' Gazette, from where it was subsequently picked up by the national press. In the course of reporting on Kelly's article, the Gazette credited Kelly with being the first man to have made known the use of mangle in the shape of bread. The Gazette further credited him in this way: the merit of having grown the heaviest crop of mangle wurzel on record, 90 tonnes per acre, on land similar to that of which there are thousands of acres in Ireland at present, comparatively valueless, but which could be made by the application of well-expanded capital, by well-directed skill, such as Kelly has brought to bear on Mrs. Evans' property at Portrane, to produce the finest crops of mangle, oats, turnips, Italian ryegrass, and perhaps wheat and barley. Yes, there are thousands of acres in Ireland capable of all of this, if in the hands of such a proprietoress as Mrs. Evans, and managed by such a man as Mr. Kelly, thereby affording an immense amount of employment, producing abundance of such crops, followed by oats, clover and turnips in due course, adding immeasurably to the people's food and the nation's wealth. Personally, I would mention that 90 tonnes of mangle per acre would compare with a good crop of lumper potatoes. That was the variety during the famine. You could get 15 tonnes per acre off the potatoes. You'd get 90 tonnes off the mangle. I grew lumper potatoes about 2 years ago as a matter of interest. They produced a very big potato. They were very poor quality and what we always call watery potatoes. They were known to grow on very poor land, but they had zero natural resistance to the potato disease, blight, commonly known as blight, Phytophthora infestans. Michael Kelly was renowned for producing exceptionally big yields of all the crops he grew on the Portrane estate. The average working man, Kelly calculated, was consuming 4 pounds of potatoes in a single meal. Figures from German scientific journals, however, were showing mangle to be as high in nutrition as potatoes, perhaps even more so. However it may have tasted, Kelly's mangle wurzel bread, and the undoubted reason for its extensive use around Donabate and Portrane during the famine years, was that it was nutritious and cost half as much as wheaten bread to make, offering a significant saving to the household budget of the poor. It gave them the financial space to purchase other foods. Whatever else William Kelly would go on to achieve in his lifetime, and he achieved so much more, this bread, his employment of local children in preference to sewing machines, his dogged preference for manual tilling over ploughing, and his swiftness in grasping an opportunity to reclaim land and grow green crops unaffected by the blight, would help in no small or uncertain manner to save many families in his local community from destitution and death during the Great Famine. I'm indebted to Gerard Ronan for allowing me to freely draw from his excellent book, William Kelly of Portrane, Forgotten Hero of the Famine and the Land Wars. William Kelly was a very educated and very efficient farm steward. Unfortunately for his time, he came from simple backgrounds and he wasn't part of the upper class, and maybe his invention, his discovery of mangle bread didn't reach as far as it should have reached. Yes, it got local recognition and it got Irish recognition, but it could have saved so many more lives if it had been acted on quicker. But they were the times that were in it. When you think about it, the death rates across the country were enormous. Even in Dublin, they were up to 20%. In William Kelly's area, they were 1%. They were less than 1%. And if more people and more places had adopted his discovery, so many people could have been saved.